we are delighted that today is hosted by Marc Villaú, an environmentalist and green entrepreneur who specializes in global change, biodiversity, and the green economy. And he's the general manager at Consorci de Les Gavares. That's the office that manages the natural park of Les Gavares, which is a 30,000 hectare Mediterranean forest located between Girona and Costa Brava. Previously, Marc founded and led for 10 years EMIS Foundation, which is an organization working in conservation, land stewardship, education, and the green economy, and also the social and environmental brand Can Moragas. He's also the secretary of the main network of public and non-profit conservation organizations in Catalonia, Sacha per la Conservación de la Natura, and he was their president for 6 years. So we are yet again in very good hands indeed, and I'd like to hand over to Marc to begin today's session. Thank you, Marc.
Kathy, thank you very much. I'm really glad to be part from all this as a moderator. I first have to say I'm a bit impressed of all this broadcasting, all this technology that maybe it's a consequence of the pandemics, but let's ask something new that maybe now most of them can be made from directly from in the middle of a project in the middle of nature, like Sacha is going to do today. I'm also really happy to be the moderator of Sacha. At first, I have to recognize that I wasn't aware about what she was really doing. I have heard about her sometimes, but I didn't know what really she was doing. And the occasion of being his moderator maybe led me a bit much more inside her real project and her real crusade, that is to defend and to make rise the awareness about nature. So as Kathy said, I am an environmental scientist. These are my studies. And I've always seen the world from a perspective of complexity between biodiversity, climate change, biogeochemical flows, etc. What I've been seeing the whole of my life is that nature is not a group of individual things, but a very complex thing that has different points and different links that arise when you look at it from different perspectives. And I think Sacha always has brought to me the impression that she always see the things like this also. So I started with a turtle. I started preserving a turtle, and I finished by creating a social and environmental brand that produces jams and has a restaurant and other products that are in the supermarkets. And maybe the trip we are going to have today with Sacha is something related to that. It's something that starts as maybe a crazy idea, as she said some time ago, and finishes with a real impact project. Sacha is the UN ambassador for the Convention on the Migratory Species. She has been presented as a sportswoman, as an adventurer, as an explorer. I think what she's most is an environmental activist, an environmental leader. And she's the co-founder of Conservation Without Borders, an NGO that raises the awareness about biodiversity conservation, but also climate change and other sustainability and environmental aspects. And they work daily in a project that is nowadays the around Britain for climate change, but she's also really known as the human swan. Why? Because she made more than 7,000 kilometers following swans in order to understand why we should preserve them and why they are so important for us. So without more delay, I would like to introduce Sacha. Sacha, the human swan, please come with us and teach us a bit what we can do for nature.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me here. Is this the point, Mark, where you'd like me to just give people a kind of 10-minute background on how I've come to be the human swan? Okay, so yeah, I'm going to just give you a quick summary of I suppose my first interest in conservation, what made Sacha the, I suppose, 13, 14-year-old that first got interested, and then what led me to this expedition, which led to me being called the human swan, and then lastly, a summary of what I learned from that and why I'm now flying around the UK. So yes, Conservation Without Borders is the NGO I started, which has got, let me go back to that, actually it's got three main aims to it, around the title anyway. The Without Borders does apply to migratory species and the fact that they see no borders. It also applies to the fact that most of our big conservation issues see no borders. Pollution sees no borders, for example, air pollution, that is. It also applies to the fact that I have been in conservation organizations for almost 20 years. And I got to the point of being quite frustrated that a lot of it was talking to each other and ourselves between the conservation organizations, and a narrative that develops which says, there are lots of problems, but become a member of us or make donations and we will solve them. And that is just not going to solve any of them if we don't get all sorts of other people on board to try and help. And the other element of Without Borders was that working for environmental organizations that manage nature reserves, I had a moment with a reserve manager in which I was asking him, what would you like to, when you retire in 20 years' time, what would you like to be able to look back on and proudly tell your grandparents you'd done in this time? And he'd been doing an amazing job managing a wetland, a very large wetland and well-known wetland reserve in the UK. And his response was really shocking to me. He said, what I feel I've done so far is I've helped to identify an important nature reserve, put walls around it. I told people this is where nature belongs, and now they don't think it belongs anywhere else. So I would like to have undone that narrative that we've created over that time. So that was the background behind that. Okay, and so Sacha, as a youngster, I grew up in the Australian bush most of the time. Different sites around on the east coast, but largely in a town, or an area of bush called Eden, which is in the very southeast corner of Australia. And this is a house we built over time. It started off as a one room and it expanded, but you can see from that there's very little distinction between the outside and in. The doors have no locks on them. We took in wombats and wallabies when they were orphaned, and my playground was very much outside. So to the right of this picture and down across the flat, there was a big river, and there's wedge-tailed eagles that would hunt kookaburras as well from our garden. So I was very much part of nature as a child. But I also had Swiss and English parents, and so I also spent significant amounts of my childhood in Switzerland and in the UK in very, very different, much more, I suppose, privileged situations. So I got a very good mixture, I suppose, of some different environments. But from living out in the bush, got very comfortable with living amongst nature, I suppose. And so my first real forays into conservation started once I'd realized, as a child, I realized I was very bad at most sports that you do at school, but what I could do was hold my breath for longer than anybody I knew, long enough even to scare people. And I later realized actually that was ideal for snorkeling and then competitive freediving. So I started freediving, but I was mostly interested in spending time out in the rock pools and underwater. And at one point, if you're swimming off Sydney and you're going anywhere more than a couple of 100 meters offshore, you notice the shark nets there. And I started to look at the shark nets. I listened to what the shark nets were supposed to do, protecting us from these predators. And I started to make a visual note of the things I actually saw caught in there, really small sharks, fish, dolphins, other things. And I decided I wanted to do something about it. And so the first thing I did was to ask the government for a list of all the things that were recorded as caught in shark nets. And I did an analysis of all that with some friends and found that whilst it was quite interesting information, it should have started a conversation. People were only this interested in the data. And so then I started going out with a camera and filming and photographing it. And suddenly people were this interested in what I had to say. And then I became Australian freediving champion. So I became a sports personality in Australia. And suddenly people were this interested in what I had to say about nature. And sometimes they didn't even mention that I was already a biologist, which I found at the time quite shocking. In fact, I rebelled against it for a while. It's like, it should be irrelevant that I'm a free diver. It's the most important thing is the facts. And then I realized that we were getting on national television, we were getting on breakfast, that this was definitely, we were definitely having an impact, we were getting it noticed. Why should I worry about that? So that was my first foray into realizing actually that there are different ways to engage people, and human endeavor, and in some cases that's extreme sports, it can be a really good way in for people that aren't already interested in nature. To be honest, many people have seen pictures of fish caught in nets, so these images weren't shocking to a lot of people. So that was my, I suppose, first journey through into conservation and problem solving. Hang on one second, let me see how I can follow the screen. Okay, so it was then, is that where I've got to? So yeah, then some years later, I found myself living in the UK, working for an NGO that works on wildfowl, so wetland birds. And I had been asked to help them with the issue of the Bewick swan. It's this incredible bird that does the migration from the Russian Arctic to the UK. And they had quite a complex challenges for them. The population had been declining, so we lost almost half in the previous 20 years, and there were many different threats to these birds. But the real challenge was the fact that they suffer different threats in different countries. So every country could say, there's no point us doing our bit if the next country won't do their bit. And the problems were everything from illegal shooting to collisions with power lines to loss of wetland habitats, extreme storms, all of those things. And in all of that, I was asked to help get people from all those different industries, everyone from the reindeer breeders to power company owners, into meetings to talk about it, because this was becoming a real problem. And I realized that scientists had been trying to do that, but they'd been starting off with the story of lots of dead swans, lots of dying swans, and that was not a story that anybody wanted to hear. And as I was, reasonably new to Europe and didn't really know the swan story, when I started looking at the overall picture and realized the journeys these birds do are incredible, from the Russian Arctic, the land of the reindeer breeders, all the way across the wildest parts of the Russian tundra, the thick tiger forests, across stormy seas and castles, and being shot at. There was a different story there we could tell. That was one of a bit of a James Bond story for the bird world. And that was one I had to start with, something that would get people excited about the birds and then want to be part of this James Bond story of helping them. And so I came up with this idea this is from tagging different birds, rather than writing letters to people asking them to come to meetings. I thought we have to bring the story, the birds to life, and how could we do that? So I thought about putting cameras on birds and things, and realized that actually that was never going to get through any process of care for the wildlife. So what we really needed to do was actually fly with them, and then that the best way to fly with them was in something like this. And you can see that it's very fragile aircraft. It's not made for international travel. You are hanging from a big piece of fabric with a fan on your back. However, there are a few amazing redeeming features for this. One of those is that you fly at the same speeds and altitude as many birds. You are exposed to the elements just as the birds are, and you suffer many of the same threats of turbulence in air, of being constantly on the lookout for places to land and rest and refuel. And also the best thing about it is that you take off and land on your feet in this aircraft, which means you can stop and land anywhere and talk to anybody. And what we really seemed to be missing was more ideas from all along that flyway of people that could help us. So yeah, hearing from people about what threats the birds are facing, but also trying to figure out who are the influencers in each community, and how can we rally mass support for the birds. So that's a bit of a summary of it. It was all about stopping and talking to people. And on that expedition, I learned a couple of things that were relevant to later on. One of those is that we managed to get huge amounts of media support for it, and that ended up being very helpful. And that was because everybody is interested in this crazy story about lady trying to be a bird, and that it doesn't matter whether you're a farmer or a reindeer breeder or the media, that works. But it doesn't make people do anything. then the stories of the science of the bird migration, the world from their point of view, that seems to spark an element of awe in people. And scientifically, awe is the feeling of awe also inspires creative thinking, the idea of collaboration, feeling small but also connected to others. So that was good at getting people thinking and asking questions. But the only thing that made people say, well, I think I could do something, was when I told stories about other people who were doing something. And then they could start to see that actually the small piece that they could do to help us, if added to everybody else's piece, could add to something significant and could potentially help save the swans. So I learned that on that expedition, and the great news is that the last swan count showed that the numbers of birds are finally on the increase after 25 years. So that's a winner. I'll jump from that because I can be asked questions about that later. The next project I am working on is all about climate. Actually, let me go back to that. And so why is that? We're not following a particular migratory species at all. And that's because there's a couple of things I learned on that expedition, that whilst there was many different threats to the birds, climate change was the factor making many of the other threats a bit worse. Also for the wildlife, but also for the people. So I couldn't avoid talking about climate change, but I also was flying a petrol-powered motor with a diesel-powered ground crew. So that was something I probably had to look at. And then in around Christmas and New Year last year, I was back home in Australia, and where we, in our house in the bush, and we'd fought many bushfires there before. So we were preparing for the fires then. And we pumped, with my mum and my siblings, we pumped 120,000 litres of water into tanks above the house and got ready to defend it. And then realised as the fire got closer that this was a fire on a different scale to one we'd ever faced before. And the head of the fire brigade just said to everybody, don't be there, we cannot fight this fire. It was 40 kilometres long, moving faster than anything we'd seen before, and about 11 kilometres high because the fire had joined with storms in the sky. And yeah, when it got near, the fireballs just exploded around you. It was like no fire we'd seen before. And so that was very clearly a climate change impact really biting me firsthand and my family. And so, yeah, we lost everything in that fire. It burned at about 1,400 degrees Celsius, apparently. So, yeah, it went through, almost nothing survived. Very little wildlife. It took 1.5 years before any significant wildlife started to reappear. So that was a big moment. And I had to decide whether to be pessimistic and think, God, this is so big, we can't fight it, or to look at the big picture and see, can we again try and join up, try and get people motivated around the idea of climate challenges, but focusing on it a bit the way we do with an adventure, where a challenge is an exciting thing. It's something that attracts lots of different people to it. A big idea will also attract talent, even if there are challenges. So can we do that? So from all of that, this year, the UK is hosting COP26, the biggest climate change conference the world has seen, and I was asked to do something. And so we came up with the idea of me putting some skin in the game and trying to fly around the country, but using an electric powered paramotor, a prototype machine developed by a Spaniard. And then in doing so, because the battery life is quite short, could I use that opportunity to stop and talk to people with climate solutions. So that's what this expedition is about. It's about flying around the country, talking to people about climate solutions, getting media, using the paraglider and the human challenge to attract interest and investment and support for their stories, and hopefully make the great ideas snowball into something bigger. So yeah, that's, we've been to everything from seaweed farms off the coast wanting to expand, people looking at insect protein, the idea of simply using parasitic plants amongst grassland to reduce the amount that people ever have to mow and use petrochemicals, and yeah, to latest innovations in battery recycling, etc. So all kinds of people from different fields coming together. And yeah, that's the summary of where I'm at the moment. Mark, I hope that is enough for you to get started from.
Sure. Thank you, Sacha. There's a lot of information, really interesting information that you have told us. One thing I remember speaking with you before this panel, I was guessing why she likes paramotor, and actually you told me I don't really like paramotor. You started this idea because you had a personal purpose. I imagine there was a personal purpose of interest, and you wanted to fix something about nature very specific, and you wanted to touch it. But at some point, I figure that, as many of us happens to us at some point, this specific thing, this personal thing becomes something much bigger, and you realize that that your personal interest becomes a movement, a common thing, something shared, something that has a bigger purpose than your personal purpose. So I was guessing, did it happen that to you, and when did it happen to you?
I think all of the things I have done have really been about, I guess I'm definitely driven by problem solving and trying to do things with my own hands. Was there a moment like that? I suppose with the free diving, there was definitely that. I was free diving because I knew I was good at it. And then I discovered that you had international championships in it. And I thought, great, I've never been good at any particular sport. Let me try this. And within 5 weeks, I was competing for the UK. So that was great. But I realized pretty quickly that actually I didn't find much personal. I was quite competitive. You learned a lot in a competition, but I didn't feel any big personal, like I didn't feel anything for it. So the training was kind of laborious. It was not exciting. But when I then realized that actually you could use the free diving for photography, for videography, and to share the story with people and help solve problems, that's when I saw that I regained my love of free diving. And when it came to the paramotoring, I actually only started paragliding because I developed a horrible fear of flying in Panama. And I just started paragliding to help me understand air so I could get over that fear. So I really suffered it. I absolutely hated it. When I said I didn't really love flying, it was probably 2 years before I was comfortable enough to actually do some thermaling and endure. Otherwise it was short flights and down again. And then I saw somebody put a propeller on their back, and that with a propeller on your back, you could fly when it wasn't when the air was quite smooth. And the aerial imagery you could share with people helped to put conservation into perspective. A wetland doesn't mean very much. For someone on the ground looking at it horizontally, you see a bit of water and you see a few plants and maybe some birds. But from the air, you can really see how it might be called the kind of, have an intricate and useful part of the landscape. So that for me was actually the idea of being able to use the imagery to change those actually is what made me fly. Otherwise, I would not have put a petrol paramotor, a spinning propeller, and run along the ground with lots of lines and fabric. I would never have put them together. I did it because I could see the purpose in it. I now quite love flying, to be honest, but it was more that the aim of what I wanted to do was enough to get over the fears.
Well, real interesting. A bit of unconsciousness, but a lot of strength and good interest to promote the conservation of a species, of a real interesting species. I want to ask you, now you are recognized as an environmental leader. This is something that you cannot recognize yourself, but somebody or citizenship says that you are an environmental leader. So when this happens, you have a responsibility, and you have to play a role in society. So tell me, what do you think? Which is your role now in society?
My role in society, I think, with expeditions like this, my role where I'm speaking to people about climate change, for example, I'm landing in farmers' fields, and farmers are being asked to farm quite differently. An important thing for me that I can bring in speaking to them about it is an openness, but also showing that I'm prepared to put some skin in the game. This electric paramotor isn't fantastic, so I have suffered quite a bit learning to fly it. And people seem to respect the fact that I'm willing to undergo some pretty big challenges to try and change in starting the conversations. The other thing, though, I think I really want to bring with this expedition and our future expeditions, which are all going to be global journeys following migratory species, is that I'm going to be bringing images of the real world and stories from real people that I want to share through various platforms, but in particular to the big UN conferences where they're making decisions on paper about the future of the planet, the future of industry, the future of people. I want to be reminding them that of the real world and the real stories of people from all around the globe, just to keep it real, because I think that's very important. So I suppose that's it, but also highlighting, wherever possible, highlighting solutions so that people avoid this idea that climate change is this thing that's too big, too dark, too awful to face. Actually, it could also be quite an exciting shift, and collaboration and working on it could also be quite exciting.
Nice, nice. In this trip you have done from Russia to here, you possibly have been in touch to a lot of different people from a very different background, especially maybe in some cases indigenous, one of the more devastated for climate change, and also one of the more aware about the relation between humanity and nature. With all these talks, I figure you could manage to have a very wide vision of what we could do as society to prevent the climate crisis. Can you share your thoughts?
My vision of what we can do, I think I'm trying to approach it from a position of real honesty, of saying I am personally up for big change, for supporting new ideas, but I don't know what they all are. So I hope to bring lots of people with me on a journey of meeting people that do have ideas and speaking to them very openly through lives and all sorts, so that people can all kind of make up their own minds to some extent. So using storytelling in a very open, very visual way that allows people in. There's still a lot of people, but one of the things I'm doing in the UK is doing vox pops in the street. So asking random people in the street what they think about certain things. And whilst there's awareness of climate change, fear of it, a lot of people don't understand still the basic mechanics of it. So what is the carbon cycle? Why does CO2 in the air, this gas, how is that actually connected to coal in the ground? For a lot of people that didn't study chemistry recently, that is still quite vague. So the idea of really understanding where the solutions might be is a problem. They are aware of the problem, but not what the solutions might be. So yeah, I suppose I don't have all the solutions, but I'm hoping to meet people that do seem to have great ideas and encourage others to support them. That's really, really what I think I can do. I don't know the answers, but I know there's brilliant people out there that do, and yeah, that's what I want to hear from.
I figured that you think that solutions not are only focused on climate, but also in the wide range of problems that we are facing as a humanity with the environment. So what do you think about the links, the relationships between climate change, biodiversity loss, and how do we have to manage to bring a bit of focus to the interconnection between all these problems in awareness? Because mainly people try to identify one problem and they want to solve it fast, and that's all, no? And maybe our society nowadays has a bit more than a simple problem, but a systemic problem. So this linked systemic and long-term problem, how can we raise this awareness by showing the whole of its dimension?
Yes, so this is exactly, so yeah, to start with, there have been recent UN reports which have made very clear links between biodiversity and climate change, and that the solutions that are put forward have to take both into account. They are completely inextricably connected. The CO2 we're burning is basically biodiversity of old, but also the adaptation or that, yeah, if species are going to be able to adapt, you need complex ecosystems in order to be able to do that. We need more areas of biodiversity in order for things to shift, because we aren't going to prevent a climate crisis. We're in it at the moment. They are inextricably connected. And what I try to do on these long expeditions is to, again, I'd say I don't have all the answers, but I do want to unpick the interconnectedness by allowing people to join us on a journey. So my next expedition, for example, is going to be at least 3 months long. It's from Scotland to Ghana in West Africa. It includes the UK, Europe, West Africa. And I hope that by people being able to join that journey and dip in and out of different stories there, rather than being hit with the whole, it's all connected, we have to solve everything at once, they can start to see little pieces of the puzzle and see how they are all connected. So people, whilst on the next expedition, I'm following the journey of the osprey. It is a species that we love in the UK and many places across Europe. It's really a journey through their eyes. And in coming on that journey, we are going to see that the fate of the osprey is also connected to overfishing that might be happening. It's also connected to the more intense weather patterns across the Sahara Desert. And that is impacted in many ways, including the growing of vegetables for Europe, the extraction of water from local water sources, growing vegetables for Europe, from Europe that we buy. You won't be able to not see, for example, that buying a bar of chocolate in the supermarket is adding to the removal of vast stretches of forest in West Africa. I don't think you can hit people with all that at once without them putting their fingers in their ears and going, no, we don't want to see that. But if you can take them on a journey and they hear that from a person in a field in Côte d'Ivoire, and you see it through like a landscape through the eye of the osprey, and you start to go, oh yeah, I can see why removing that forest is leading to more runoff in the river, is leading to the loss of seagrass. I think slowly, I basically would like to give people a bit of an intense journey, which is similar to the one I went through of kind of mapping how different parts of a landscape fit together, the way that an ecologist kind of learns through books and at university. I'm hoping to share that journey with people through an adventure. But the answer of exactly how we do it all, again, I'd say I don't have the answer, but I'd like us to all have a bit more of a shared understanding and a shared vision of what it looks like, but also by showing solutions, what could be. And I think that's the big thing for me, is painting constant pictures for people of not, we must stop doing that, we must not do that, this is bad. There must be a lot more of, this is what could be, this could be amazing. And that's the piece of the puzzle that I would like to help.
Thank you for sharing your thinking out the box. I think we have a really interesting question, also thinking out the box, from James. He says, if you think possible that hunters can change to protectors of nature everywhere, so hunters can become nature protectors?
Everywhere, not every hunter, no. There are definitely some out there who I have met and found despicable. Some from Southern Europe, for example, who want to go to the Arctic and shoot 100 whitebirds, and that's what they pay really top dollar for. That for me, I think we're going to have a hard time trying to turn them around. However, in the Russian Arctic, we now have, after the expedition, so I involved as many people in the hunting community as possible in helping me to figure out the logistics of crossing the Arctic, because they know the logistics, they know the land better than anybody else. They have the hunting huts I relied on for staying in. I invited them in at the beginning as helpers and to give advice, and through that they got engaged in the story of the swans. And now we have every single one of the hunting tourism operators and most of the Nanets communities and villages as part of what's called a Swan Champion Network. So they're the ones now coming up with the ideas of how we solve the illegal shooting, putting up the posters, describing how it all works. So I would say in many cases, yes, most people don't want to be the problem, but you have to give them a route in to being a hero in the story rather than painting them at the outset as the villain. Because if you do that, they're instantly going to see you as the other side and the one to attack. If you give them an opportunity to be part of the to be a hero in the story, then that is how I've managed to. And again, you're not going to change everybody, but you can change enough people that can shift a situation for the better.
I figured that when you reach Russia and you face some hunters that I'm sure you face them at some point, that wouldn't be the trial of a romantic movie, maybe. But here you may have some strong and hard moments. I would like to ask you this: which strong moments you found, and also Bianca Fiore from Italy, I imagine. She also wants to ask you what were your happiest movies. So which are the hardest and the happiest moments in the travel from Russia to UK?
Oh, the hardest moments. Do you mean the hardest moments in terms of flying, or the hardest moments in terms of people?
I imagine people. And also the happiest ones, I imagine also.
Let me think of the hardest moments. To be honest, I really like talking to strangers, and I am interested in even the strangers that really don't want to help, if what they're saying gives us an insight into how we could potentially solve it, what the local attitude might be. So to be honest, even the difficult conversations, I found them still interesting. I think the worst interaction I had everywhere we landed, the team landed, was we were welcomed. That's without, absolutely everywhere. And generally when you land, people were asking, no one shot at me. There was no threat to any kind anywhere. I suppose a hard moment was definitely though realizing, let me finish that one first. So a hard moment was landing at a school in Rochester in the east of London. That was the first time somebody actually was properly angry at having landed in their field. Every other place was lovely. I had a very challenging moment up at the first school I landed at in Russia, where I was dragged into the local school, and they put kids of all ages into one room and wanted me to speak through the other paramotorist interpreter to them. And all this time we've been talking about hunters, and we'd all been mostly envisaging like men, older men, adult men. And in this room full of kids, I asked the teacher, do the children know much about wildlife? And she said, yeah, most of them start shooting for their families at age 9. And then I was realizing, so all of this time we could have been actually trying to speak to 9-year-old kids who are shooting because they don't have agriculture in that part of the world. They rely on hunting. That's the sort of age group we could have been. And it was a proper moment of realizing that there's an element of arrogance and I suppose ignorance that can really stop us in conservation. But the best moments I think were, one was asking a group of Nanette's people, when we were talking about climate change, they talked about all the impacts for them, the climate change is making the tundra thaw. Anthrax had just had an outbreak because some dead reindeer from many years ago had thawed. The tundra collapsing with climate change causes oil spills up there as well when the pipelines, because the supports on the pipelines break. For them, it's very, very real. And I said to them, what would you say to people in the West who maybe don't believe that climate change is a thing? They rolled around on the ground in fits of laughter going, ugh, you're supposed to be the wealthy, educated people. How can you not see this? And so I suppose that was a moment where I decided actually, I really need to do what I can.
Nice.
Oh, and another magical moment with the birds was having 2 birds break away from the flock and fly at my right wingtip like I was the lead bird in a flock. That was the best. I wasn't trying to fly near to any birds on this expedition, just following their migration through tracks, and there was big flocks in the air. I wasn't trying to fly next to any particular birds, and yeah, to have 2 birds come and decide to fly with me in V formation was absolute magic. And that's when I agreed that I would accept the title Human Swan. Before that, it felt a bit uncomfortable, but after that, I was like, okay, I can do that.
Nice. Here's an anonymous spectator aware about this problem, the conservation of migratory species, and he says, or she says, What can she or he do from Barcelona or London to help on this cause?
Sorry, could you say that again? What can people from Barcelona
or London help to the cause of migratory species?
I guess the main thing is learn what migratory species there are passing through your part of the world. You're all on the East Asian, Australasian flyway. So that's a really important one. They will all be using wetland sites on that migratory birds generally do this, do big flights and are stopping off around wetland sites. So anything you can do to protect the wetland sites that are near to you, find out who is already working in that area and whether any of the skills you have can help. If you're a lawyer, if you're an accountant, if you're a designer, you'd be really surprised at how many of those skills would be super helpful to a conservation organization or an individual who's already working in that space and might have a much better idea of what needs to be done but doesn't have all the skills to do it.
Sacha, Sylvia Brandy asks, which are the roles of schools in all the situation, in all the awareness and on the change making on the environmental problem? Which are the roles of school?
I think I mentioned earlier what I learned about kind of the power of different sorts of stories. So crazy lady being a bird, that gets people's attention, that's it. Then the awe of learning about something, allowing people to ask questions. So that's the bit I think schools can really do well, is inspire a sense of awe and intrigue and investigation in young people in the natural world, but in whatever way that might be. Definitely give them, I suppose I would like to see, the experience I had was being allowed out into nature and allowed to figure stuff out for myself. That's really powerful. But I also think, yeah, give them problems to solve so they get comfortable early on in having different ideas, and the idea that not every idea has to be great, but coming up with ideas and sharing them is a really good thing. Give them a sense of empowerment that actually, you know, it's one thing to have a problem and to moan online about it. That really does get much done. But if you can empower them with the idea of actually, how would I solve it? What skills have I got? What skills people in my network have to solve it? Get them coming up with ideas and being creative and trying to put them into place, and make sure they're not scared of failure or being or their ideas being called crazy, because enough of my crazy ideas have actually made a big difference.
Nice. Sacha, I have 3 questions, one from Silvano Brandi, one from Kyle Perkins, and one from myself, that I would like to pose you in one whole big question, because I think that is facing a very interesting issue. Silvano says, is it more important to you to inspire individuals to make changes in their own lives that can help with the climate crisis, or to get governments and corporations to take notice of what you are doing? So are more important individuals or corporations? Kyle Perkins says that climate change, biodiversity, and threatened fauna and flora are all massively important issues. But what do you believe is the biggest problem for nature in this moment? And what do you believe to be the main action people can take, which will make the biggest positive impact for conservation? I will ask a last question. I've been reading a book from Naomi Klein, The Last Days, that said that the environmental cause cannot be fought alone. That has to be next to the gender movement, next to the equality movement, next to the poverty movement, next to the different movements that are facing like racism and etc., that are facing and threatening our world. I think, which is the way we can face the awareness, or which are the ways maybe that we can face, or are there specific ways, or we have to point everywhere? All these 3 questions, I think they are all focusing on that, on how we must focus and in where to start. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think I'm going to answer it in a completely different way, because I think the fact that all these questions are going on in people's heads, once they start to care, they realize there's everything is connected. And indeed, you need to be empowering women if you want to be solving the climate crisis. Like, those two things would have in the past seemed to be, very different issues. I think I'm going to answer this completely differently and say, I'm mostly worried that people's fear of not including everybody, doing everything right, incorporating all the different elements, is actually stopping a lot of people from taking any action, or any action, or feeling that they are empowered enough, because it's too complicated. I would instead like to say that the key thing, and I try to, same message I say to individuals as I will say to corporations, definitely we need to change the systems. Like, the systems will make it easier for people, but people showing willing and voting is the right ways, or at least, talking to their politicians, also help to change the system. So they are connected. But what I really want to say, I suppose, is for everybody, the key thing is to think about yourself as an individual and in your work and on any other spheres of influence you have, and just try and focus on the bit that you think you can do and you can do well. And I have found, for me, that is generally, and I've definitely stepped on toes, sometimes missed off including all the right people. I think for me, I've always found the things that are really successful are when I've combined something I'm really passionate about, something my rational brain says to me is actually really important, and where my skills are strong. So if I can find projects or ideas where I combine all those three things, I will not only have influence, but also encourage other people to do the same. So I would say that try and not solve all the big pitches or do it all in the right way, because everybody will have their own influence. Figure out what you're really passionate about, what you think is really important, and where your skills are, and try and focus on doing that bit. And if everybody did that, this snowball would be rolling.
So I was guessing with all this reflection that at some times, quite frequently, I would like to talk to my past Mark, the 20-year-old who started in his conservationist movement, and what was happening, and what would happen in the future, and maybe some advices to change the way it has been done, all this. Have you ever guessed that if you could talk to the young Sacha who was diving in the sea with the sharks, if you could give her an advice of how to manage all the situation from the future, what would be?
I would say, first of all, don't fret about whether you found the right career, because the right career can be all sorts of different things. And the second thing would probably be, don't be scared to fail. If you're doing something that you think is important and that is bringing you joy or bringing you some satisfaction, I think you will end up getting to the right place. And actually, every single bit of failure is just also really fast learning. So, up to my, in my early 20s and my up to definitely into my 30s, there was definitely lots of moments where I just thought, I don't know what I don't know. I don't know enough to solve these problems, but I knew enough to try, and I've learned certain things that I would never do again around campaigning. But I wouldn't go back and do it because I learned that either that's not the right thing to do, or that it's not the right thing for me to do. I'm not the best at that. I just think it was rapid learning. Trial and error is rapid learning. And you will generally be judged by how you respond to something not working, not by the fact that you've tried something that didn't work. And just trying something is enough in many cases. So yeah, I'd love to know what your advice to yourself was, Mark, if you've come to a clear answer to that question.
Well, maybe next time I can show it. I have a question here from Iracy Teixeira. She says, what is your opinion on how the mass media and journalists approach and are responsible in all climate and environment problems and coverage? Does independent environment journalists have a space to impact in pro of environment?
Specifically, independent journalists, are you asking? Was the question?
I think on how mass media treats environmentalism and environmental problems, and how and if there is enough space for independent journalists to treat the problem.
Yes, I feel like you probably should ask an independent journalist that question, because I'm not in that space anymore. I just personally have noticed a rapid shift in the last few years in the level to which the mass media will happily talk about climate change, will happily talk about solutions. So for example, this morning we were on Good Morning Britain. Fair enough, it took a celebrity, it took Joanna Lumley being on television. Oh, they actually tried earlier on, but they wanted me to do ridiculous, very difficult things, like a live interview whilst I was running, taking off in a prototype aircraft. It was all very difficult. We didn't get any coverage. A celebrity turns up and says, we want to do, that she's supporting it, and suddenly they have a weigh-in, but once we had a weigh-in, they've now been tweeting and sharing pieces that are not about celebrity Joanna Lumley, they're about things that people can do to help get involved to solve the climate crisis. So my personal feeling is that individuals are starting to step up in their roles and do more and more. They might still have to find the easy way in that makes it get to the top of a list on your breakfast television show. If that's a celebrity, that's a celebrity. The way that I found being a freediving champion was my way in. Work with that. But I'm finding more and more that actually there's real intention and desire to help, and more people are prepared to push in their media roles to get the right stuff put on, onto television, for example. And definitely independent journalists have always been out there, investing their time in covering stories that don't already have an instant tick. It often costs them more than they make as an income, but they've definitely led the way in lots of ways. It's a shame that there isn't yet more investment in specific environmental journalists in a lot of media, but I'm hoping that means they're actually making environment part of everybody's portfolio.
Oh, really interesting, Sacha. I think I tried to pose you in difficult situations, and I'm not able to make you fail with difficult questions. Also with all the people who's following us. I think this is a really interesting reflection about how can we manage biodiversity and climate change problems. And I will pose you a last question in order to close a bit this panel. A question from an anonymous spectator who says that how we can talk about biodiversity and climate crisis to our friends and families.
I guess that is one of the things that I try to do. I try to find ways of doing it that would pass the pub test. So think of something you could say to somebody at the pub that makes them not go, ugh, you're a nerd. Ugh, I don't understand what those words are, and makes them go, what? And they want to talk to you about it over a pint. So I do it via, an adventure, and maybe starting off with some of the crazy characters I met. Like, do you know, yesterday some mad farmer drove over my wing and tore a hole in it. It doesn't matter who you are. People are like, why was this farmer mad at you? It's a way into a story. It really did happen, and it was really quite traumatic, but it's a way into different stories. So that's generally what I try to do, is find something which passes the pub test, where someone standing next to you at the pub is going to go, really? Tell me more.
So the pub test, the nuts test, no? Are you nuts or pub test? No? It's really, I think, inspiring final advice from you, and that let me thank you very much for this conversation. People who wants to follow Sacha can go to the link that is shared in the chat, but also into her website, and just follow the streamings she's doing daily with this new project she has. And I really thank her for all the dedication today and for sharing all these ideas. And also I will get back to Kathy, so she can give you some last advice and close the final talk about biodiversity that hoping is the last one of the season, not the last one in the whole life. So hoping that we can see each other soon, especially in December. And thank you very much for listening to us and being with us today.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much, Sacha. I'm going to make a quick plea on behalf of independent media as Atlas of the Future, a small independent media organisation. We are super focused on the climate crisis and on biodiversity issues. So please follow our work. Really, the best thing people can do. It's a very, very tough thing to, for small and independent media to exist and do their work up against the tech giants and mainstream media. So it's very helpful when people kind of follow and support the efforts of any environmental journalists that you like, any small media projects that you like. Please, your sort of eyeballs and your follows are worth an awful lot. But that was a distraction from really just giving my enormous thanks and appreciation to Sacha and to Mark. Sacha, we are such super fans at Atlas of the Future of everything you do. Really, really inspired by such a lively session and discussion. And thank you to all our attendees, because those are some really excellent questions. So thanks for your curiosity. I found it really inspiring actually just to start thinking about what it means, that this thing about migratory species, right? To think beyond borders, which is such an important concept in the world that we live in, and what Sacha was saying about really relishing every human interaction and celebrating the contributions that we can all make. Those are really powerful concepts for us to end this series with. So now, as Mark says, this won't be the last time we will be hosting events about biodiversity or climate challenges, and I hope that people will continue to follow and join us for these future events, and in particular join us in December at Fixing the Future for more excellent inspiration of this nature. Thank you again, Mark. Thank you, Sacha. Really appreciate it. And thank you all. Bye-bye.
We can feed the world without destroying it.
S'ha fet més evident que mai que estem en situació d'emergència.